Imagine you're auditioning for a role of the main character of a comedy show. You've heard about an ad that is looking for a black actor to cast into the show, and turns out you're the perfect person for the job. After being successfully hired as an actor, you tell your producer what kind of person would characterize that show. The producer, who's white, told you that, okay, we will let you be the main character, but you have to act a certain way that will make the audiences laugh their socks off and make us profitable. Just try coming out naturally, like a friendly conversation. You were suspicious at first, but all you could ever ponder about is being famous. So what's stopping you from achieving your nobility? African Americans have, for a long time, been seldom seen as a role model in the media when new forms of entertainment were being discovered. Every day, opportunities become available to everyone and are used in creative ways. But sadly, the media has hindered the majority of African Americans from ever getting a spotlight. And even if they are, would have whites tell them what to do, say, or act as. Especially in television, African Americans' vision of equality had differed dramatically over the decades, facing covert racism, discrimination, stereotypes, and other prejudices. So today, I will derive my explanations and analyses from the documentary titled Color Adjustment to highlight the systemic oppression of black actors in TV shows and black people in other media. We're also going to discuss some faults within the documentary, critiquing missing information that would have strained its credibility. But before talking about that, I want to discuss some of the context within African American stereotypes and where they come from. This will be important when we talk about TV shows depicting these stereotypes. Stereotypes or archetypes on enslaved Africans have started to gain popularity because of the ways they behave in their different cultures. This can be a form of some of the earliest entertainment industries, such as political comics, minstrel shows, circus performances, and much more. It could also be used as an attack to those who attempted to have liberty access to radicalizing politics and giving full freedom. Some of the most well-known archetypes out there are mammies, a large black lady who is a servant to her master and children of masters and lacks sexual desire, the Sambo, a black man who is a jokester for whites, and so on. The Brutes, a black man who's very abusive to his white woman, and other archetypes. These were more so depictions from the eyes of whites as opposed to blacks who have no understanding of them. Images such as these persisted well into the early to mid 20th century that included favorable outcomes that segregated African Americans, which includes Jim Crow laws. African Americans have become integral to a growing part of the minority class that fought resistance over these segregationist laws by dominating white jobs that were normally illegal to hire. As these battles kept going, a new platform of entertainment has sought to turn over a new leaf in the ways both whites and blacks are being represented and viewed. A documentary titled Color Adjustment looks back at African Americans on TV and how they have overcome these racial barriers. In the 1950s, television was in the middle of experimentation, and approximately 12% of American households own one. One of the earliest shows that featured a black character was The Beulah Show, which centered around a mammy named Beulah, who ecstatically became a housemaid to her white servants, and the majority of the shows that casted African Americans were pulled off the air without given reason by the NAACP in the 1950s. As television grew more mainstream, more people have begun to explore a new phenomenon in different types of shows. Because of these removals of African Americans in TV shows, television began to fall back on keeping up with society, and attempts at this are seen more frequently later on. In 1964, the world watched the civil rights demonstrations, giving more representation of African Americans in other forms of media, like the news. It paved the way for a new kind of programming, with the new stereotype of black people. Instead of functioning as a demented character, black people, especially black women, were seeming to assimilate with middle class whites. They would dress in bright, fancy clothing that models after suburban white neighborhoods. An example of that was the early 1970s show called Julia, where her distinct stereotypical looks are seen. However, it's very clear that this show, and similar shows like All in the Family, disguises the ways televisions hinder the true realities of African Americans in the news, which misrepresented both views of the racial integration within both scenarios. There were many attempts at reviving the concept of having shows dedicated to reflecting these messages of racism and daily struggles. By the 1980s, these shows would provide more equality for African Americans and help achieve the dream they are looking for. The documentary, if I would guess, is roughly 90% lacking in statistics. Because their approach is more on historical archives, statistics, I think, should be very much considered in determining why African Americans were being underrepresented in the media. This would clear any misinterpretations about shows being represented that way. The people they're interviewing are mostly forming opinions based on what films they looked at instead of connecting ideas together. It would be very crucial to switch them interchangeably so that the documentary stays relevant to the story. Overall, I think there needs to be room for improvement in justifying why African Americans are oppressed both inside and outside the public.